Good evening, everyone, to the February 27th meeting of the Bellingham City Council. First, we have no announcements tonight, but I would like to say that the Bellingham City Council meets all the requirements of the State of Washington Open Meetings Act. Our first order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. Would you all please rise and join me? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
April Barker?
Here.
Dan Hamill?
Here.
Gene Knutson?
Here.
Michael Lillquist?
Here.
Roxanne Murphy?
Here.
Pinky Vargas?
Here.
Terry Borneman?
Here.
Well, thank you, everyone. This is our first annual Family City Council Day, and we're going to have a special opportunity for some of the children who showed up today to watch the City Council in action come up to the microphone and tell us what's on their mind, what they'd like the City Council to hear from them. I have 3 children who've signed up to speak. The first one is Oliver. Would Oliver like to come over to the microphone?
Hi, my name is Oliver and I'm 3 years old. Thank you for being here to listen. I'm worried about people getting sent back from where they came from. Did you know that there was a mommy who got sent back to where she came from and her children were left behind? Also, my Omi escaped the Berlin Wall in 1961, and it was very dangerous. She almost died. She didn't have permission. She wanted freedom and justice and work and food. She always followed the rules after that. But that time she had to break the rules. Please help the government be more kind to other people. I know you've done a lot to help the United States of America, but I'd like you to do more. Please listen to undocumented immigrants and other people and kids. Thank you for listening.
First rule. Oh, let him clap for the kid.
No clapping. You're going to get in trouble. Thank you, Oliver. Next, Bijou. Would Bijou like to come up and say something to the City Council?
Bijou, you can tell us your name and where you live if you want to.
My name is Bijou, and I'm 7 years old. I go to school at Cedar Tree Montessori, and
You want to tell us why you wanted to come today?
Mom, please.
I think we all matter and we should all be treated equally, and I really want to help with what's going on right now.
Thank you, Bijou. That was very well said. Is Ailey here? You're next. Okay, Ailey, you come on up. And if you don't need the extra steps to reach the microphone, you don't need to use it.
Hi, my name is Ailey. I am 10 years old, almost 11. I go to Columbia Elementary School. My favorite thing to do in Bellingham would be anything with my friends or family. And something I'm worried about would be that our president is denying climate change. And so I really want to help with the idea of finding new energy sources. And I think a great idea would be to put the solar panels on the moon. And we could do that. We have the money and the time and everything, and it would save us like millions of dollars on the oil we choose to drill. So, yeah. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ailey.
You younger council members are going to be replaced. I can see that right now.
Is there any other person under 18 who would like to speak? Okay, if not, we're going to go ahead and is there more? I only have one list. Did I miss a piece of paper? We have time.
You could stand next to the mayor, I bet.
No.
Nope. Yeah. You know what you want.
I hope Donald Trump doesn't get impeached because an even badder guy would be the president, which is bad.
Can you tell us your name, please, too?
Oh, my name is Rowan.
Thanks.
Okay.
My favorite thing to do is go to my friend's Asher house.
Okay, thank you very, very much. We're now going to begin the first of two public hearings. The first one is a public hearing to consider removal of on-street parking from a section of Orleans Street and also from a section of Woburn Streets. Ted, do you want to start with this?
Yeah, thank you. Ted Carlson, Public Works Department. The action before the council is a public hearing, so we'll provide a brief staff report, then ask the council to open up the public hearing. As always, we're happy to come back at a future work session if the council has more questions. We did receive some questions today from Council President Lillquist. I'm sorry, that's on the next public hearing. I had two public hearings tonight. So this is the continued implementation of the Bicycle Master Plan. As per City Council policy, anytime we are requesting to remove parking on an arterial street, we bring the action forward to council, have a public hearing, and have the council take action. So I'll turn it over to Chris, and he'll go through a brief presentation on the projects that we're requesting action on in terms of parking removal, and then we'll answer any questions that you might have. Thanks. while they're setting that up, I will just add that, as is our policy with any action that comes before the council that is transportation related, we did take this item to the Transportation Commission at their last meeting. Gave a presentation very similar to the one that you'll see tonight, and Chris will talk a little bit about the discussion at the Transportation Commission, some of the public comment that we received at the Transportation Commission, as well as some of the responses to that, and what the council or what the Transportation Commission's recommendation was. All of that information was included in your packet. We did receive some comments from the public that were written comments that we did put in the packet for
So
your
let me
review.
read some of that. In the, for the agenda, it says the 2014 Bicycle Master Plan recommends removing on-street parking from one side of the Orleans Street in a section from Alabama north to Barclay Boulevard, and also on one side of Woburn Street from Alabama Street south to Iowa Street. And the purpose would be to install marked bike lanes on these arterial streets, and these marked bike lanes would feed into other bicycle paths in the city. Public Works conducted parking surveys, which I think Mr. Como will tell us about, on these streets in November and December of last year in 2016, and they documented low parking utilization rates on the west sides of each of those streets. Mr. Como, do you want to pick it up from there?
Thank you and good evening, Council. Chris Como, Public Works. Sorry about the delay here. As was stated, we've done some studies on Orleans and Woburn Street. The reason we were looking at these streets is they are recommended for bicycle facilities from our Bicycle Master Plan. This is where they are. You've got Orleans Street over here, as Council President Lilliquist said, from Alabama up to Barclay, and then over here on Woburn from Iowa up to Alabama. Here's our bicycle network overall citywide. Here's the recommendations in the Bicycle Master Plan specifically for these two streets, talking about parking removal. And then here's the map indicating, again, where those are at. These are the parking surveys that were done in November and December of 2016. We, for a 1-month period on each street, went out and observed mornings and evenings in terms of parking utilization, and as was indicated, we discovered that the west sides of each street had the lowest parking utilization, so the recommendation that we're making is to take the parking off of the lowest usage side of the street. Here's some examples of what we typically found out there. This is Orleans Street, and here's Woburn Street. Back to Orleans. And
Chris, what time of day or night is that?
some of these are in the morning and some of them are in the evening. Usually the daylight here is in the morning, and it got a little darker in the afternoons. You know, it was late November, early December. This is the notice we sent out to all of the property owners on each side of each street, just to let everybody know what was going on and that they would have an opportunity to come to the Transportation Commission on February 14th. And then here tonight. At the Transportation Commission, we did have a couple of visitors and a couple of public comments were made, and in your packet is one of the written comments that we received. On Orleans, there is a home occupation or business here on the corner of East North Street and Orleans Street, Barbara's Beauty Salon, and that's the party we got the written comments from. Here's a close-in shot, East North Street and Orleans Street. There are 2 parking spaces right here on Orleans Street. There's parking available here on East North Street. Here's what that looks like up close. East North Street. There's the 2 parking spaces right here on Orleans Street. As you can see, there's not much happening on the street with parking. These last few slides, I just want to remind everybody why we're even looking at these streets and talking about taking these measures. It's because our Bicycle Master Plan has recommended these things. We're trying to create citywide connectivity and mobility for different types of bicyclists. This area, we've done a lot, but we have a lot more to do. These are some of the things that we've done in the last 2 years. These are some of the bicycle connections that we've made with our bicycle boulevards and some of the other improvements out here. And so this is just showing the connectivity that we're creating. These slides demonstrate what happens when we make these connections. In the red, this is a disconnected network. And as we go and make these connections, if we connect our entire network, this is what happens. It changes the connectivity and mobility for the people who live in these areas. So we're quite literally changing the quality of life for the people who live out here by giving them opportunities to get into different parts of the city by walking and biking. So on February 14th, we presented this to the Transportation Commission, and they discussed it and voted unanimously to recommend approval to the City Council. And as in your packet, our recommendation is to remove parking on the west sides of each street so we can move forward with designing the intersections at Orleans in Illinois and at Woburn in Kentucky.
Okay, thank you, Chris. City Council members, are there any questions before we start the public hearing? So I would like to actually ask Jean's question a little more closely. You said mornings and evenings. Can you, for the evening hours, can you say like from 4 to 6 p.m. or from 6 to 8 p.m. or?
I believe it was 4:30 to 6 p.m. It's in the packet.
Okay, I just didn't see it. Any other questions? Okay, well, I'll go ahead and open up the public hearing. I have here one person. Barbara Ira is signed up to speak to this issue. Would Barbara like to come forward?
I have a beauty shop at 2601 Orleans Street. That's where I live. My name's Barbara Ira. I think my main concern is safety. I have another person that works with me, and there's a lot of people coming and going out of the driveway there that he showed a picture of. And I worry about the safety of people. And I have a lot of older customers that park right out in front on the street, and they can just walk down the sidewalk into the shop. It's a pretty short distance. And if that parking is taken away, it will really be an inconvenience to them. The way they can park in front makes it so they can just ease into traffic. And traffic on Orleans Street, as Mr. Knudsen knows, it's bad. And where I live, when cars pull in and out of the driveway there, it's kind of on a hill, and cars tend to speed up.
Barbara, I'm sorry. Your sweater, I think, is rubbing the microphone. It's making noise. Thank you.
Cars tend to speed up, just kind of up the hill from my driveway. And so I worry about people pulling in and out of the driveway and there being an accident. And now if bicycles are zooming down the street, that's really, it concerns me. And it seems like maybe Pacific Street maybe would be a better choice to do this. But if they don't, maybe the city could provide a parking spot just out in front of my shop. Safety is the main issue for me. I guess that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Is there anybody else who would like to speak in the public hearing on this topic? Okay. First, Christopher, and then you, sir. Just state your name when you come to the microphone.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, my name is Chris Diley. And will I be allowed to speak during public comment as well, or I'm signed up for public comment? Is that permissible to speak at both times, or?
Yeah, you can speak at both. Confine these comments to the parking issue.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, my concern is that whenever I hear of parking spaces being removed, and perhaps not particularly in this instance, but in other instances, is that's where I live in my vehicle. And it's what I've read online is that it's the fastest growing law in the country to make it illegal to sleep in your vehicle. But I left here just recently because it was so cold. I went down to Redding, California, and their affordable housing list is closed, just like it is here. So I just wanted to give a view from the bottom of what that's like. You know, I had, right when I got down to Redding, within 6 days, 2 different security guards had threatened me with having my vehicle impounded for trying to sleep in my vehicle. And then I was given a jaywalking ticket for $190 for walking across the street when there was no cars anywhere. So my point is that we're pretty darn desperate. You know, when we've got nowhere to go but to sleep in a vehicle, and you take away our spaces to do that, where the heck do we go? If we go in a parking lot, we can't go there. They've got security guards, et cetera, et cetera. So I think just my last point would be like, the more Trump Towers there are, the less places there are for homeless people to sleep in tents, if that was legal, but that's illegal as well. So I'm just really, really depressed. So I came back up here, and again, I've got nowhere to sleep in my vehicle because people don't want us to do it. So thank you.
And if you just come forward and state your name and what city you live in.
Good evening. My name is Brandon Lanile. I am a resident directly affected by this proposal, and I kind of found it offensive that the survey that was conducted basically was a selective survey of a 30-day period in the winter months, not including weekends or any time that people would frequent these residences. I think further studies and a lot more in-depth survey should be conducted if you're going to take away the parking spaces of taxpayers that may have chose to purchase their homes because of the on-street and off-street parking options. I think a decision shouldn't be made until the proper survey is done instead of a selective 30-day window at spot checks 3 days a week, not including the weekends, because it doesn't give a full story of the parking situation. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Seeing nobody else, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to the City Council members.
So in the packet, it says it was sent out to homeowners. Did you also send it out to the residents if they aren't the homeowner?
Yeah, it was mailed to the physical address, so resident or property owner, homeowner.
Okay. So it was mailed to both the property owner and the potential resident if they were different?
So the way that we send out information like this is through the assessor's database. And so we get that list from the county assessor. It's the most current list per quarter. And that's who we mail it to. It's the property owner. We don't always have the specific names of the people living in houses that they may not own.
So that's different than what you just said. You're saying you're sending them to the property owner, but you don't also send one to the address? So there could be residents
They
that
are
live
sent to the mailing address on
to the
record.
mailing address. And then if it was different than the owner, it was also sent to the owner. Is that correct?
So are you asking, are they sent to the physical address as well as, say, an out-of-state property owner address? The answer is yes.
Gene?
I've been driving that road since 1986. I don't live on Orleans anymore. I lived there for 11 years, but I drive F Street, Rotor, all the way to Alabama, take a left on Orleans. So I drive it every night, and there is a ton of traffic there. I have a bunch of questions, but I'm going to save it for the committee meeting.
Okay. Anybody else right now?
I
Terry?
don't have a question, but I think since there has been questions raised, and usually when we have had questions about something that we would refer it to committee, so I would like to move that we refer this to the Public Works Committee.
I'll second that.
We have a motion to refer this matter to the Public Works Committee. You got that on your schedule maybe for the next meeting, the meeting after that?
Yeah, we could certainly bring it back to your next committee work session, first one in March. And if you do have questions and you can provide them to us, we'll make sure we come prepared to respond.
Any further discussion of the motion to refer to committee? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that's referred to committee. Thank you for that one. The next public hearing is on low-impact development. Let me turn to that one. This is a public hearing to revise the municipal code to make low-impact development the preferred and commonly used approach to site development, as required by the city's National Pollution Discharge Elimination System Phase 2 Municipal Stormwater Permit. That's basically a clean water permit the city has to control our stormwater runoff from not only city streets but development in the city to reduce the amount of pollution. This is a hearing on a rather substantial set of code changes to that. I don't know if I should turn it over to you, Ted, to begin with.
Yes, please. Thank you. Ted Carlson, along with Jason Porter, our stormwater manager. As Council President Lillquist mentioned, this is a requirement of the city's permit through the Department of Ecology. We operate our stormwater system under the permit, the National Pollution Discharge Elimination Systems permit, the NPDES permit. New requirements require that we look at our code and make sure that our code does as Michael suggested, requires that LID is the preferred method of dealing with stormwater runoff. Certainly by looking at things like eliminating or reducing impervious surface, retaining vegetation, things of that nature to try to mimic the natural conditions whenever possible. We did hire a consultant, and I'll turn it over to her in a moment to look at our codes. We did find that excuse me, the city codes for the most part were very supportive of this type of practice, low impact development, but certainly there were sections throughout the city code and many of the different titles that required updating, and that's been the process we've been going through, a public process laid out by the requirements from the Department of Ecology. We've had some workshops on this. We've had a public hearing at the Planning Commission, a work session with the Planning Commission, and now bringing it forward to the City Council. Again, this is a public hearing because we are proposing to amend the municipal code. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jason and then on to the consultant for a brief presentation, and certainly be here to answer questions after the public hearing if needed.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Jason Porter, Public Works. Yeah, and so what we've done is we've consulted or hired HBL as our consultant to go through a process. It really is kind of a three-step process that we went through. One of them was looking at what we call a gap or opportunity analysis of evaluating all of our city codes and policies to look to make sure we don't have any conflicts with the principles of low-impact development. We then also made the required code changes, which is primarily going to be under Title 15. And then we also had an opportunity to kind of clean up a few of the code, some typos and some other issues we've had in the code in the past. And so this process really includes those three steps. So at this time, I think we'll hand it over to Brittany Port with HBL to provide you guys a brief presentation on the process that we went through, as well as some of the code amendments that were being made.
All right. Thank you, Jason. Good evening, Council. Again, I just wanted to say I'm with AHBL. We've been working with the city, Jason and Kurt and Brent and Renee, to analyze the city's codes and standards and see if we can integrate low-impact development as required by the NPDES permit. There are a couple other team members at AHBL who have been involved in this process, and I just did want to acknowledge them. They're not here tonight, but they've been before other commissions, the Planning Commission, in the past, so you might have seen their names elsewhere. Oh, sorry. I forgot to do that. It's probably the most important thing. So again, yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that you might have seen their names or seen the video of Planning Commission. They are also with HBL. So I wanted to just kind of give you a brief overview of tonight's presentation. What I'm planning to talk about is the Federal Clean Water Act and the NPDES permit requirements that have stemmed from it. And then talk about integrating LID BMPs and principles and how we're sort of going about that and why we're required to do that. Go over the project schedule and our approach to this project, and then briefly summarize the different code amendments that you've seen in your packet, and then take any questions. So the Federal Clean Water Act was adopted in 1972, and it established permit requirements for discharges to waters of the United States. Originally, it focused on industrial discharges, point sources like industrial facilities that were discharging directly to surface waters like lakes and streams. It was one of the first environmental regulations that we saw, and it's now evolved to include municipal discharges from separate storm sewer systems, so MS4s, which the city of Bellingham has one. Science has found that stormwater is actually being found to be like a very significant cause of water quality impairment. So that's why it was added in, and a permit was created for it in addition to industrial and the construction permits. This permit is handed down from the EPA to the states if they choose to administer it. So the Department of Ecology does administer this permit. And there are 2 permits that they have written. There's one for Phase 1 permittees and then another one for Phase 2 permittees, so it lags a little bit behind the Phase 1. And the City of Bellingham is a Phase 2 permittee. The Clean Water Act is technology-based. It requires the best available technology to be used. In addition, the State Water Pollution Control Act requires all known and reasonable technologies to be evaluated for stormwater quality control, which is how we get to this 2013-2018 NPDES permit, because this permit's continually evolving. Within this permit, a special condition S5.C.4.F was included, and that requires that permittees review, revise, and make effective their local development-related codes, rules, and standards, or other enforceable documents to incorporate and require LID principles and LID BMPs. And the idea was really, it stemmed out of the previous permit, the 2007 permit, and the appeal to the Pollution Control Hearings Board, that it did not go far enough to evaluate LID principles, as those have been determined to be all known and reasonable, one of the all known and reasonable technologies for controlling stormwater pollution. So what this condition then requires is that we revise our codes and standards to make LID the preferred and commonly used approach to site development. And those revisions are to be designed to minimize impervious surface coverage, native vegetation loss, and stormwater runoff in all types of development situations, really from the onset of development. And as I mentioned, Bellingham is one of over 85 NPDES Phase 2 permittees in Western Washington. So this is just a list of all of the other permittees that you are one of who are all going through the same process. You're not alone. And so I really wanted to point out the way that the permit has defined low-impact development, because I'm sure you've heard the word low-impact development before and have your own ideas of what that means, and you've probably seen a lot of LID throughout the city, because the city has been doing it for quite a while, even before it was a voluntary measure in the 2007 permit. So the city has really been a leader in that. But the way that the Department of Ecology has defined LID is that it is a stormwater and land use management strategy. So it's really more than just the BMPs that you're probably used to seeing, bioretention and permeable pavement throughout the city. There's 2 parts of this process that we need to go through to be in compliance with this permit condition. And so for the stormwater management strategy portion of that, the city is satisfying that by adopting the 2012 Ecology Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington. And the city has already adopted that, so you're already halfway through this process. The manual provides the design guidance for LID and conventional stormwater BMPs. As far as the land use management strategy portion of this definition goes, the city will be satisfying that by making amendments to its municipal code and standards to minimize impervious surface coverage and vegetation loss. This requires a little bit of finesse, because there's no metrics for how this needs to be done, which actually really leaves it open for cities to really customize this, just because all municipal codes and standards are organized differently, and no 2 are really alike. It also leaves it open for the city to harmonize it with other planning efforts that have been done, such as its GMA compliant comprehensive plan. The permit requires municipalities to amend local codes and standards to achieve the following. The LID BMPs are required unless infeasible, and as I mentioned, that's covered by the Stormwater Management Manual. And then LID principles are also required. I did also want to point out with the first bullet point, LID BMPs being required unless infeasible. That's actually really well defined in the Stormwater Management Manual, what is feasible and what is not. It's kind of a question that comes up, but there's numeric standards within the manual that stipulates whether or not a BMP is feasible. And if it is feasible, they are required to use that BMP. So as we discussed, the permit integrates principles and BMPs for low-impact development. So we're looking at site planning techniques to minimize impervious surface and minimize native vegetation loss from the onset of your site development, and then using your BMPs to manage the stormwater from your development. Also, you will still see conventional engineering practices such as vaults and ponds. Those are going to be continued to be used, but LID BMPs will be also required. And again, so you're halfway there. The city has already adopted this manual, so we're really tonight just talking about that first half, which is the LID principles. So not all sites are going to be appropriate for LID stormwater controls, and to assist customers, the city has decided to, and is currently in the process of preparing an infiltration potential map, similar to the map that you'll see on the screen, which is actually from the city of Bellevue, who prepared one and went through the same exercise that the city is currently going through to prepare this. This map will allow property owners to quickly get a snapshot idea of whether or not their site is suitable for infiltration-based LID BMPs. So they'll still be required to evaluate non-infiltration-based BMPs. But if their site is determined to be infeasible, meaning that it met one of those numeric infeasibility criteria in the manual, they won't need to go through the process of determining if their site infiltrates. And so again, to integrate these LID BMPs, the following BMPs are required in the stormwater manual: rain gardens, bioretention, permeable pavement, dispersion, downspout dispersion, sheet flow, perforated stub connections. And you've probably seen a lot of these because they're already being used, though, so they'll just continue to get used. So addressing the LID principles component of the permit, then, we're required to reduce impervious surface coverage. And this is more than just saying, okay, we're going to use permeable pavement then instead. We actually really want to reduce the impervious surfaces that are allowed to be created in the first place. So we're really looking at opportunities to reduce impervious surface coverage wherever possible. We're also looking at reducing vegetation loss by not removing trees to begin with, not removing the soils that are underneath them to begin with where you don't have to, and just reducing stormwater runoff in general, so that way we make LID the preferred and commonly used approach to development. And then I just wanted to acknowledge there is an underlying tension or challenge associated with harmonizing the permit requirements with the Growth Management Act. And that's something that was acknowledged by the Pollution Control Hearings Board during the appeal. And they recognized that there was a tension here, but they really felt that the NPDES permit requirements could be harmonized with a local community's obligations under the Growth Management Act, and which is why they gave that flexibility, and they didn't stipulate metrics as to how those principles needed to be incorporated. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the project schedule, where we've been, and kind of the process we took. This is a graphic that just sort of details a roadmap of the process. To begin, we assembled a team of internal stakeholders. We had city staff from Public Works, Planning, Fire, Parks, everybody who would really kind of like these codes would touch on. So we assembled that group. We then reviewed the city's codes and standards for opportunities to incorporate LID. And after we came across some opportunities where we could address that and we could meet this NPDES permit requirement, we amended codes and the city's codes and standards, and that's what you've seen in your packet. We then took those amended codes to Planning Commission and had a public hearing in October and January, and they recommended approval onto council, and so that's why we are here tonight. In addition, we've been having public involvement throughout this process. There was an open house that was held on January 19th prior to the Planning Commission public hearing as well. And then that brings us to today, February 27th, for the public hearing before City Council. And As I mentioned, we've been following a process for this. This has all been outlined in a document called Integrating LID into Local Codes, a guidebook for local governments, and that was prepared by the Puget Sound Partnership and also HBL. And it was actually acknowledged by the Department of Ecology as a good guide for communities to go through this process, and so they, within the permit, identified this is the method to go through the process. So as I mentioned, we assembled the team, and we had a project kickoff meeting and really dived into the LID topics that we are looking to address, because they kind of span a huge variety of codes, and then reviewed the codes and filled in the gaps by amending and preparing draft code language, and that brings us to the review and adopt stage, and then after that we'll be implementing them. So briefly, I wanted to talk about the proposed code amendments. We amended or prepared quite a few new definitions in the city's code. Some of the definitions are new, and they're consistent with the new stormwater manual. So when they developed that, they had definitions that were new. Something that's changed is that they're regulating hard surfaces now versus just impervious surfaces. We've updated all of the definitions to be consistent, so that way there's just no issues going back and forth between those two regulatory documents. And then we've also added some new definitions or amended definitions that are specific to the city of Bellingham and how staff has decided to address incorporating these LID principles, such as allowing for landscape-based LID BMPs within passive open space. So there are definitions for those. So within Title 13, Streets and Sidewalks, we've made a couple amendments. Some language was added to each street type to allow for curb cuts to vegetated LID facilities that are within the right-of-way where feasible, and also allow for these LID facilities to be within medians. And so they wanted to be specific that this is allowed. If you are placing an LID facility within the right-of-way, you can have a curb cut for that facility to direct stormwater into it. Also, we amended it to this section to state that permeable pavement shall be utilized within the street right-of-way where feasible, and within sidewalks, bike lanes, and parking areas to the maximum extent practicable, and amended to clarify the maintenance of LID facilities and who would be responsible for that maintenance, whether it would be the city or abutting property owners should they have a covenant or HOA that would require them to maintain those facilities. Within Title 15, we made some amendments to definitions, specifically the map of Lake Whatcom watershed, and that was just sort of a housekeeping issue to make it consistent with Section 16.80.040 of the Bellingham City Code. We added land disturbing activities as a type of redevelopment that is subject to stormwater minimum requirements consistent with the manual, and required removed requirements for LID and stormwater BMPs from this section because it's going to be, or it is already addressed elsewhere in the code and it doesn't need to be restated. So some of these were pretty minor changes, and also just updating language associated with illicit discharges to make sure that's consistent with the manual. We decoupled the grading thresholds from the IBC International Building Code, so that way that numeric standard that was already in the IBC is just going to be within the city's code, stating that a grading permit's required for 300 square feet of hard surface that's added, and that construction stormwater pollution prevention plan would be required. And then we, as I mentioned, amended the metric for stormwater management from impervious surface to hard surface, as that's what's being used in the ecology manual now. And provided language for exempt gardening activities in the Lake Whatcom watershed, and I believe that was just another little housekeeping inconsistency within the code that should have been already incorporated. And the stormwater minimum requirements 1 through 10 that are in the manual, those have been matched in the code, so that way there's no inconsistencies. We also amended the inspection program to require inspections for runoff controls, and amended it so that the city has a little bit more flexibility in issuing a stop work order and applying a fine for violations. So the city has the discretion to pursue criminal penalties, and the language was just lessened from shall to may. Within Title 16, the environment, we added a tree retention plan requirement. So the applicant is required to identify any trees that they're going to be preserving or removing on their site plan, and identify how they plan to protect trees that they are preserving during construction, be that with construction fencing or some other method. And we also tied grading activities to an associated development permit, so those will now be linked. And added a requirement for a sequencing schedule of construction projects to avoid land disturbing activities in the winter months when soils are exposed to erosion. Within Title 18, the subdivision code, we didn't make a lot of changes here. City staff is currently working on this title. So we did want to just clarify within the cluster subdivision chapter that reducing stormwater runoff is one of the purposes of that chapter, and encourage the use of shared driveway and require permeable surfacing within parking areas unless infeasible as a performance criteria. Within Title 20, the land use development title, we made some changes to parking to allow parking reductions up to 25% applicable to all land uses now in the city. And certain criteria will need to be met to allow this. A parking study would need to be completed to determine that a lower parking standard is appropriate, or if the site is located within a quarter mile of the GO line route, or if enhanced bike or pedestrian facilities are provided. We also amended shared parking requirements, and this just replaces and consolidates some of the shared parking requirements that were spread out throughout the code, and amended standards throughout the title to require permeable pavement unless infeasible for required improvements, and to allow a 2-foot reduction in parking stall length when the stall overhangs a landscaping area, meaning that the car can overhang, the parking stall doesn't need to be as long, and we can reduce impervious surfaces that way. And throughout the title, we made changes to landscaping requirements. So landscape-based LID facilities such as bioretention or rain garden, something that looks vegetated but functions as a stormwater management control, are allowed or encouraged within open space, passive recreation, or interior parking lot landscaping. And we added a interior parking lot landscaping minimum for lots with 15 or more spaces. So 20 square feet of landscaping is required to be provided per stall, and that landscaping could be used for bioretention or a rain garden. And that also applies to commercial development. And so now I will take any questions, and assisted by city staff.
Thank you, Brittany. Council members, any questions? Okay, so I did send you a list of questions. Some are small, some are medium. We can come back to those later. I think we'll go ahead and start the public hearing at this point. I did not receive anyone signed up for this public hearing. That may have been a mistake. If there is anybody who would like to come forward right now and speak to the topic of our LID regulations, now it's time to do so. Okay. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing and bring it back to the City Council. So at this point, it's information only. Is this scheduled for a work session or anything?
We can certainly bring it back for a work session. We were leaving it up to council whether or not you were comfortable making a motion tonight, or certainly come back at a work session. We could, if you would like, go through the questions that Council President Lilliquist provided today. We got them today, but I think we can address most of them, if not all of them, if you would like.
Well, Terry first, what do you have to say?
Well, yeah, I haven't seen any opposition to this. I would like to hear the answers to your questions, because you asked some very good questions in that, so I would like to hear that before we make a decision, but I don't, since I haven't heard any opposition, and depending on the answers to the questions, we might be able to dispose of it tonight.
Any objection to that? Okay, let's go ahead and go through those then.
Okay. Yeah, I'll turn it over to Jason, and he'll go through those questions.
Yeah, so I was forwarded your email, and I think I kind of broke it down into the questions. You had several questions within each sort of statement, so hopefully I can identify the questions within your statements and adequately address them. Like I said, we just got these earlier today, so we were kind of working pretty quickly to make sure we had adequate answers. So one of them that you had was essentially, how will the performance of permeable surfacing or permeable pavement be monitored? And so permeable pavement's been around for quite a while, and so the ASTM group has developed what they call standardized ASTM testing. And so depending upon your permeable pavement type, they've got standardized testing that you would use to then determine that the permeable pavement is still functioning within its design parameters. So it's a standardized test that is being performed with most installations with permeable pavement nowadays. Another question that you had was really at the cost of low-impact development techniques. And this one's kind of a difficult one to really pinpoint. Because a lot of these LID techniques are the preferred option, right? So if we've got a site that supports an infiltration design, you have adequate native soils to do infiltration in, that would always be the preferred option by a developer because of the reduction in your detention facility sizes. So you could eliminate a detention pond, which takes up real estate and property, or you could eliminate an underground concrete structure. So most instances that infiltration design would be permeable pavement over maybe a treatment sand layer directly into aggregate. And so that's a significant design savings over traditional hard surfacing and then infrastructure to support that. Permeable pavement or permeable concrete is at a premium price compared to traditional asphalt. So if you were looking at paving a parking lot with asphalt versus permeable concrete, there would be a 40 to 60% expected increase in that premium. But about 15 to 20% of that increased cost is the subgrade preparation to support infiltration for your stormwater design. So we do see an increased cost if you were being required to put permeable concrete just down on hard pan native soils, but this infeasibility analysis wouldn't require you to do that. And so if you did geotechnical work and found that you had soils that didn't infiltrate, then you would not be required to use permeable pavement. And so the cost, it's really difficult to quite pinpoint. It also comes down to your maintenance. You know, if you're staging and stockpiling materials on your permeable pavement, you're going to have increased maintenance cost. If you're icing, you may have increased concrete wear due to the ice getting into your, or due to the salt getting into your concrete section. So you do use a little bit more care to try and minimize what your long-term maintenance costs are for those. Bioretention or rain gardens are almost always going to be the most cost-preferred option. Instead of putting in a concrete filter vault, this is a landscaped area. And like you saw in our code amendments in here, we're now clarifying in the code that you can use your landscaping to incorporate bioretention and other low-impact development features. And so they're really cheap to build compared to other hard surfacing. And then some of the other ones are just ones that have been being used for a long time. When we talk about rooftops, doing infiltration systems for even a single-family home, you know, putting a dry well or something in your front yard, you know, we're seeing that used pretty extensively in the city now. You know, we're an old community. We don't have stormwater infrastructure to serve every street, every neighborhood. So as just a development requirement, in a sense, is that people are using these techniques because they don't really have another option. And they've been successfully employed for at least, I've been here since 2006, since that time. So those are really kind of real standard things that we would expect. Another one they were talking about, what is the state of art on permeable pavement? And I guess that's kind of reflecting on, you know, where are we at with this stuff? You know, is this new technology? Well, permeable pavement in particular has been around for a long time. It kind of originated in the use on the East Coast and has been migrating this way. In the city of Bellingham here, we had our first installation in 2001. It's done on a low-traffic alleyway that the city has been monitoring its performance on, and we've found structurally it's holding up fine. We did intentionally neglect maintenance on it and then came back with more a higher technique. We got new maintenance equipment, and we found that we could reestablish the infiltration capacity even after a prolonged period of lack of maintenance. So we do know that these systems can be maintained. The maintenance is different than you would see from traditional asphalt. The use of permeable pavement, at least in the city of Bellingham, has been used quite extensively since 2006. So we're moving on quite a few years now of these types of techniques and BMPs being used by developers and by the city on capital projects for quite a long time. The Department of Ecology has actually been providing training for designers and municipalities since 2008. So we're the products have been vetted. We've got standardized STM testing. This isn't considered new stuff. The other question we had is who can apply it? Do we have, how available is the technology and how skilled are the tradespeople within our community? And so now there's a lot of different permeable paving products that you can use. And so I didn't have time to research permeable pavers versus permeable asphalt versus permeable concrete. But we did find with permeable concrete, there's a certification process that you can receive as an installer. And that's kind of a self-certification that you could do to promote your business. And in Whatcom County, we've got 12 technicians certified installers that are serving Whatcom County, and we've got 2 craftsmen certified. These would be the highest quality that we might use on like a capital project. They're all serving Whatcom County. And so we've found, at least through capital improvements, that we really haven't had a shortfall for the people wanting to do this. These LID code requirements are happening all around us. You've seen there's 85 communities or agencies that are adopting this, and the trades are realizing there's money to be made. And so we're really seeing a great influx of the people that are able to do this and also the quality of the installations that we're seeing. Another one you had about the feasibility and the exemption in there. So like we were saying previously, the feasibility criteria for these low impact development techniques are published in the Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington, published by the Washington State Department of Ecology. So in the 2012 manual update, that's when they printed or created all the feasibility. And so all these agencies, municipalities provided approximately 30,000 comments to the Department of Ecology for these LID code updates. And out of that comment period, they came up with this feasibility. So for permeable concrete in particular, there's about 3 pages of infeasibility. And it starts with, does your geotechnical engineer say this is a bad idea? I mean, that's a simple way of describing it. And so, you know, would it result in slope failure? Would it result in flooded basements? These are all criteria that your design professional could evaluate and say this is not a good idea for these reasons, and it would be infeasible. So if your design professional recommends against it, and they're a legitimate person within the field, then it would be considered infeasible. There are other options instead of having just a straight geotechnical person saying it's infeasible. There's also what we call metrics. If you're within a proximity to a landslide hazard area, it would be infeasible as well. So they've tried, or the Department of Ecology incorporated measurements to try and prevent the bad stuff from happening when you're doing this. And we really rely on a good designer or a good engineer to consider these things. They're the ones that are looking at the project and determining what's going to be appropriate for the design. And that kind of also goes into, you know, we've removed some language that would say not adversely affecting surrounding or downgrading properties. We used to have language in that when we were saying we were encouraging to the maximum extent feasible infiltration. We've removed that language now because that's within the feasibility criteria published by the Department of Ecology. We don't need to say it. Ecology has gone into great more detail than our one sentence we included in our ordinance. Another one you had here was our illicit discharges and how they are defined or enforced in the Lake Whatcom watershed. So the code change didn't change much for illicit discharges. We did a little bit for the code enforcement, and that was to provide flexibility for our prosecuting office. We had in the past, if you had one penalty, then that could be a citation. And then your second violation within a 2-year period shall be a misdemeanor crime. We changed that to maybe. So it can provide a little bit of flexibility with the prosecuting office because we were finding that in most instances we didn't have the resources necessary to do that. Now for Lake Whatcom in particular, it's mostly going to be complaint driven. So we've got inspectors that are traveling the watershed almost every day. We have them out there quite often. And we also receive calls. We have a stormwater hotline that we receive calls and complaints for illicit discharges anywhere in the city. And so we oftentimes are notified by the public or by our inspection staff of a certain activity that would result in illicit discharge in the Lake Whatcom watershed. We don't have a program where we're sampling water at the end of the pipes for unknown pollutants and then trying to trace those back up. So it is kind of a complaint-driven and observation-based system we have for enforcement of illicit discharges in the Lake Whatcom watershed. You also had some comments about some information in there. One of them would be references to ordinances. We recognize that. What we did is we provided this to the city attorney's office for their review. They recognize that. Staff, we just didn't have time to incorporate those to research and reference all those ordinances. We intend to remove references of the ordinances and provide specific references to the municipal codes in there.
So on that particular issue, if the council did choose to move forward with first and second tonight, we would make those changes prior to third and final.
And I think that addressed most of your questions, if not all of them.
The only thing you left out is I think there was a sentence fragment.
Oh, well,
You just need to add a
we would
verb.
fix those things, yeah.
Okay, council members, anything? April?
So will this update create any contradictions in, say, planning codes? Because you suggested shared driveways would be encouraged, but we have pipe stems, other requirements where we don't necessarily allow for shared driveways in single-family developments. So will we be updating other codes to not be contradicting what this one is saying?
Good evening, Kurt Navafeld, Planning and Community Development Department. Yes, part of this overall process was looking at all of our codes, so we looked at where conflicts between land use ordinance as well as the stormwater codes took place. So changes that you see actually make it a better situation, and they combine those more. So we shouldn't have any conflict. We're actually encouraging it more often. So we're looking to make it even easier for people to do that. And another big change in our land use codes was bringing the vast majority of our standards are scattered throughout our code. We really consolidated this and streamlined it and put it in one section, so it's much more easier for both the applicant, property owners, developers, as well as city staff to review them.
Yeah, one of the statements that you had made about impermeable surfaces, about whether it's required or would be used, was when the testing shows that that you're not getting water flow in, it's not required. In those cases, that seems to me soils where you need more elements to protect against runoff. So is there other requirements, other things that would be required to offset the lack of fermentation into the ground for things?
Yeah, and so we're looking at just the requirement for the use of permeable paving. You still have your other stormwater requirements for water quality treatment and water quantity or flow control if you exceed those certain thresholds. And so we would look at, is the use of permeable pavement feasible? And there's that criteria. And if it's not feasible, you would not be required to do that. But it wouldn't waive your obligation from providing stormwater mitigation for the rest of your development if you exceed those thresholds.
So in a scenario like that, Terry, when you don't have any infiltration, that's all part of the modeling and calculation for detention. So they would be required to do typical standard detention and the runoff. That's all part of the equation, the modeling, the sizing of those facilities. So that's all taken into consideration.
Okay, I was just confused when that was said, and I was thinking, well, if it's cheaper just to pave over and it's not required, but you've got less. So, but as long as that part's covered within that, okay.
Roxanne?
I first learned about NPDES about 10 years ago, and boy, it's just as exciting then as it is now. But I am really in sync with the values of this approach and the movement that we're making here. So I'd like to move that we would make low-impact development the preferred and commonly used approach to site development as required by the city's national NPDES Phase 2 municipal stormwater permit.
Second.
We have a motion before us to approve these changes to the Bellingham Municipal Code, several sections, to make low-impact development the preferred and commonly used approach to site development. There was one other question. It was kind of a legal one. After the Planning Commission, there was a suggestion, I think probably by legal, to remove the word encouraged and just to say the word permitted. That was a softening of the language. I didn't really like that. Is it possible to just say encouraged and permitted? Does that?
Absolutely. What it's trying to say is we'll let you do it.
Okay.
I mean, that's really, and so whether we say it's permitted, it's allowed, it's encouraged, staff isn't
To me, it's important that if we're really going to make it the preferred approach, that rather than just saying permitted, we say encouraged and permitted. And I think it was in like several sections on 2 pages. You know what I'm talking about? So I would move an amendment that on those 2 pages for that particular usage of the word permitted, that it now say encouraged and permitted.
Second.
We have a second on that. Do I need to explain that motion anymore? Okay.
Staff understands as long as council is comfortable, yeah.
Okay, all those in favor of that amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so with those amendments, is there any more discussion on the main motion? April?
Yeah, in regards to the parking space requirements that we have here, I know this didn't quite go into that. Is that something we're going to be looking at again? Because I'm thinking about our legacies, environmental justice, talking about social justice. We're talking about potentially allowing for ADUs, and some of these, some would consider to be requiring quite a few parking spaces, which will lessen the likelihood of having infill. So the parking requirements, they're just attached onto this because this is part of the same, or are we going to be discussing parking requirements?
Good evening again. No, actually, when we do ordinances and changes, we incorporate whole sections of our code. So the actual number of stalls is not being proposed to be changed tonight. We actually did talk about that. Other jurisdictions have done that. They've reduced parking in order to reduce impervious surfaces. At the time that we were looking at our codes, we thought that by utilizing the waiver and allowing for the reduction in parking spaces, so that's now an administrative, it applies to all of the uses where it only applied in certain areas, most likely our urban villages. We felt that by taking that section and incorporating it and allowing it for all people to waive parking stalls was our ability to address some of those certain circumstances as well. That was the big component behind that. We also felt that if we wanted to go in and change parking standards, that would be a much larger discussion, and therefore we didn't attempt to go there. We know that that's something that the community members, planning, and council has asked about in the past. So that's definitely something that we can look at in the future. But at this time, due to our time constraints and making sure that we're compliant with the NPDES permit, we wanted to move that along and kind of shelve that much larger discussion for a later time.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion?
I just have one last one.
April, go ahead.
So the tool that you suggested, the infiltration map, you also talked about doing some geo-testing. Is the infiltration map user-friendly enough that if somebody was just thinking about making some changes on their property, they could go on there and see if they even have the type of soil that would require them? Or would you also have to go do a geo-test once you got serious about doing?
Yeah. So what we're wanting to do is, a lot of the infeasibility criteria has to do with slope, landslide hazard areas, and so what we're wanting to do at this time is use existing city information based on our GIS system. We know where we have our steep slopes, and we know where we have landslide hazard areas. We know where we have other areas that would meet the infeasibility criteria within the ecology manual. So what we're wanting to do is, what do we have now to help people identify if some of these things are feasible? Now, it isn't going to be the infiltration testing, because what we don't have is we don't have enough geotechnical information to put together an infiltration test map, but it's going to be a map created that would incorporate other features that would make it infeasible. So if you looked in there, if you found, well, I'm on a property that's at 15 or exceeding 50% slope, infiltration would be infeasible. You wouldn't have to go any further. But if you did look and you found that if it was feasible for all other criteria, you may need to do geotechnical work to do that last piece of infeasibility analysis on your property.
Any further discussions or questions? Okay, we have a motion before us to amend parts of 5 titles in Bellingham Municipal Code to make low-impact development the preferred and commonly used approach to site development in Bellingham. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. That's how City Council works, folks. Okay, our next order of business. Thank you very much. And Brittany, thank you.
Thank you.
Jason, thank you very much. We will now move into our regular 15-minute public comment period. There are 7 people currently signed up for it. You will have 3 minutes to come before the microphone and do your best to emulate the young speakers earlier today. The timer will go off when you have 30 seconds left in your comments, so don't stop. Just start wrapping it up. The first name on here is Mr. Peter Gigante, followed by Maureen Monroe. Peter, please come forward.
Didn't start yet.
On the need to better secure
the border and to punish employers who choose to hire illegal immigrants. We are a generous and welcoming people here in the United States, but those who enter the country illegally and those who employ them disrespect the rule of law, and they are showing disregard for those who are following the law. We simply cannot allow people to pour into the United States undetected, undocumented, unchecked, and circumventing the line of people who are waiting patiently, diligently, and lawfully to become immigrants.
Americans, not only in the states most heavily affected, but in every place in this country, are rightly disturbed by the large numbers of illegal aliens entering our country. The jobs they hold might otherwise be held by citizens or legal immigrants. The public service they use impose burdens on our taxpayers. That's why our administration has moved aggressively to secure our borders more by hiring a record number of new border guards, by deporting twice as many criminal aliens
are you going to have any
before,
comments of your own?
by cracking down on illegal hiring, by barring welfare benefits to illegal aliens. In the budget I will present to you, we will try to do more to speed the deportation of illegal aliens who are arrested for crimes, to better identify illegal aliens in the workplace as recommended by the commission headed by former Congresswoman Barbara Jordan. We are a nation of immigrants, but we are also a nation of laws. It is wrong and ultimately self-defeating for a nation of immigrants to permit the kind of abuse of our immigration laws we have seen in recent years, and we must do more to stop it.
The city's primary responsibility is to provide a safe environment in which all residents can live and raise their families. The city should do all it can to discourage violent and drug-related crime. There are things we can do to coordinate with the federal government that don't cost money or time and that are respectful of people's expectation of quiet enjoyment. We can't just bury our heads in the sand. If we are not part of a solution, we are definitely part of the problem.
Thank you very much. Next, Maureen Monroe, followed by Kerry Kovaleski.
Hi, good evening. I want to thank Jen for inviting me tonight to the Family Council. I'm here as a parent. My name's Maureen Monroe. I live in Bellingham. I have a son named Jim Monroe. He's 28, and he lives with a developmental disability. He has been attending the Max Higbee program for over 10 years. The Max Higbee program is a community-based recreation program for youth and adults with developmental disabilities and provides opportunities for personal enjoyment through a diverse range of activities. The Max Higbee program promotes social, physical, emotional, and cognitive growth and development for its members. Participants achieve a greater independence in their daily lives and better involvement with their community. Our Max Higbee program is growing in leaps and bounds. It's going to require us to look for a new space. We are now currently located on Bay Street next to the Upfront Theater. We value our downtown location, which provides visits to the YMCA, the food co-op, coffee shops, gallery walks, museums, bowling, and so much more. As the City of Bellingham looks to develop our waterfront, we ask that you consider our program in your current 5-year needs and assessment plan. We hope to expand the network of businesses and other local downtown partners to support the services and programs that Max Higbee offers its members. Hopefully together, the future of the Max Higbee program will continue to grow with its vision and mission of caring, inclusiveness, respectful, thriving in the community where people live, where we are empowered to grow and enrich our lives. So as I thank you so much for the opportunity to come. Mayor Kelly, it's been many years since we've talked about individuals in this community that live with a developmental disability. If you talk with Jessica Lee from the Health Department, the sheer numbers of young men and women and exiting high school in the next few years, those will be new members of the Max Higbee program. And so I'm excited to watch the growth, and hopefully we'll get a new place, maybe a community center. We could call it the Linville Center. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Maureen. Next, Carrie Kovaleski, followed by Maggie Lowcamp.
This is in regards to the same ordinance up for approval tonight relating to immigration enforcement. Being against sanctuary city policies, we are not asking our police to go round up illegal aliens or to ask people they encounter if they are illegal. We are merely asking the police to hold on to an illegal alien they have in custody who's committed a crime and turn them over to ICE. It's not doing the federal government's job. What is so difficult about this? The left never wants to consider the word criminal, but instead always falling back on peaceful migrants. The Center for Immigration Studies found that in a 9-month time frame in 2014, sanctuary cities shielded 9,265 illegals from deportation, 62% of which had significant prior criminal histories, and 2,320 of them were subsequently rearrested for new crimes. As of last year, 69% of them were still at large. Out of 653 people arrested by ICE in the raid a couple weekends ago, 74% had felony criminal records, and virtually all the rest had some form of criminal record. In 2016, under Obama, no more than 59% arrested fell into the same hardcore category of felony criminal records. According to ICE, so far this month, there has been 653 arrests made through raids, plus 80 more taken into custody over the weekend in massive drug and weapons raids. Under Obama, 2,059 arrests in March of 2015, 3,100 arrests in April of 2012, 2,900 arrests in September 2011. Overall, Obama deported 2.5 million illegals during his presidency. There was far less of an outcry with Obama raids. What's really going on here is that it's not the message, but the messenger you have a problem with. It's very unfortunate you can't see past the messenger for the good of the city and country. For decades, the government has turned the other way while migrants came here. While the illegal alien violated immigration law, our federal government permitted it. Trump wants the rule of law reestablished in America using current immigration laws that have been neglected for many years. He hasn't created new laws. How does following the rule of law become so controversial? Sheriff David Clark of Milwaukee said, "Those that oppose the rule of law and the applicability of the law on immigration, surely, but in other avenues of American life as well, offer no vision, only lawlessness, obstruction, and chaos. They offer no morality or certainly no courage. They offer only appeasement and the false currencies of concession and popularity over the virtues of morality and certainty." I want to remind our police officers who took an oath to uphold the law, you need to enforce the federal law as well.
Thank you. Next up is Maggie Lowkemper? Okay. Followed by Eric Bostrom.
My name is Maggie Lowkemper, and I live here in Bellingham. This is a true story. I have a brother who is in law enforcement in a different state, and he's been in law enforcement for 20 years. And I spoke with him the last time when I got out of here. I told him what was said in here and the experience that I had. And he said, "Maggie, it's not just there. It's everywhere." In the state that he lives in, I won't mention it because it's near the border, but he lives up in the northern part of it. He says, "We are getting so many illegal residents here committing crimes. Our jails are full. We don't even have enough jails for them." It says, and the ones that commit the least amount of crimes, we just can't put them in there. But he says, it's the ones that commit the crimes of raping, killing other people, stealing, assaulting, robbing. And then he says, and Maggie, in my state, in the city that I live in, there's 2 policemen for every 1,000 people that are coming in. See, there's so many, we just can't keep up with them. And he says, it's a pity that in this country we have laws, and yet because we have these sanctuary cities, we cannot do what we want to do because the leaders in these cities don't see the forest or the trees through the forest. They only see what's in front. But if they ever have any relatives that die, then hopefully their eyes will be open to see that these illegal aliens who are committing all these crimes, they just have to go. They have to be deported back to their own countries. Because in this country, we are a country of laws. And he says, I love my job, and I have always loved getting the criminal off the street, but we are so inundated with illegal immigrants committing so many crimes that we just can't keep up with it. So let's think about that for this city. I'm a citizen of this city, and I want to live in a city that can protect me. And not just me, but everybody in the city, including the members of the council and their families, because we all have to think about what will happen when these criminals will be let loose. Thank you.
Thank you, Maggie. Next up is Eric Bostrom, followed by Chris Diley.
Yes, Eric Bostrom, resident of Bellingham, Washington, and happy to be. So, now, last time I was here, I brought this sign. I brought the sign back because it was so popular, and you can see it was kind of ruined a little bit last time. Now, I don't want to so much talk about the illegal immigration problem. It is a problem, a big problem that we're having. But I want to talk about me. I'm an American citizen. I deserve protection. Now, when I was here last time, there was a man who was identified later by a police officer that I know as being an undocumented immigrant who was concerned about ICE. For that reason, I don't know why he maybe I'm not with ICE, by the way, but if I was, I wouldn't tell you. But anyway, I was sitting over here, and he came and grabbed my sign, and you all saw it. You all saw it. I saw you see it, and he knocked my cell phone out of my hand. He ripped my sign, and he ran up the stairs. Nobody did anything. Now, as God is my witness, I know 100% sure if I would have done that to one of them, to him, for instance, grabbed his sign, knocked the cell phone out of his hand, I know I am 100% confident I would have been hauled out of here, probably arrested. I know that's true. You can shake your head no, but I know it's true because I know the law. I'm a street preacher. I do this all the time. And I'm on the streets of Bellingham all the time, Seattle, all over the country. Now, I know police officers have told me that what was done to me is assault. And, it's assault whoever does it. And it's not right. Now, 100 of my friends, approximately, and myself were out here today for 3.5 hours in the snow with Trump signs, and I just wanted to let you know that Trump's coming. The Trumpsters are coming. America is changing. You need to wake up. America is changing. Now, you may not notice it yet, but in a year or so, you will. And there's going to be a large rally. You're all invited, by the way, in Olympia this Saturday, March for Trump at 12 noon at Heritage Park. I want to invite you all to come to that. But let me just close with this. There was one of your things that you talked about last time was treating everybody in the town fairly. LGBT, Black Lives Matter, global warming enthusiasts, or whatever. But I would like you to consider something that treats me fairly. How about me? How about Trump supporters being treated equally with other people? How about me? That's what I like. So I'm interested in myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Chris Diley next, and last person will be Joseph McDonald.
Hi, my name is Chris Diley. This is regarding the federal government presentation here in Bellingham recently on their draft grizzly bear restoration plan of the reintroduction of grizzlies into the Cascades. As you see on the National Park Service website describing it, that it was only written comment only if you were to go to their presentation. That's why I'm here talking about this. The Western Front article from February 14th of this month, Cascades will see more grizzly bears, they left out certain points. One, Why reintroduce grizzlies into a more densely populated region when grizzlies are not endangered? The recovery efforts have been successful and they are thriving. The federal government is removing them from the endangered species list, from the threatened classification of the endangered species list. Both grizzlies and black bears are being killed by cars and semis at an alarming rate. Montana's independent record: bear roadkill count abnormally high in western Montana. Next 2 weeks expected to be even worse. That was from October 12, 2015, which included every fall a lot of black bears and a few grizzlies are killed by cars and semis on the I-90 between Missoula and East Missoula, quite likely due to the speed limits being increased throughout the U.S. Last month, Como News reported regarding the Cascade Grizzlies that they would be far from civilization, tagged and monitored by biologists daily. However, last year, major newspapers and National Geographic reported the cub of Grizzly 399 was killed by a car in Grand Teton National Park, explaining Grizzly 399 is named for the number given to her by researchers who track her by a radio collar. So that means that when they're tracking them in Grand Teton National Park, which is far less civilized than here in the Cascades and the lowlands with the I-5, that they couldn't even stop that cub being killed by a car being run over. So how are they going to stop that here if they get reintroduced into the Cascades? How are they going to prevent cubs being run over and mothers killed and cubs being orphaned? Very quickly, just by the way, National Geographic reported Grizzly 399 frantically tried to save her cub after it was hit by the car. That's just flat out heartbreaking. My last point is that Dirk Kempthorne wrote in the 2001 when they were going to reintroduce the grizzlies into Idaho. He pointed out that that the federal government, they assumed injury or death to people and even calculated the value of human life. A human killed by a grizzly bear in Idaho would cost the federal treasury between $4 million and $10 million. As far as we know, this is the first time that death or injury to humans has been factored into a program proposed by the federal government under the ESA. I find that repugnant. The plan left the final decision-making authority in Washington rather than in the states as promised. He emphasized it's a state issue. The feds are railroading the grizzlies into the Cascades, and we don't have Jay Inslee speaking up for it and saying it's a state issue, let us decide. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Now Joseph. And that'll the last of our public commenters tonight.
My name is Joseph McDonald, and you know I have a speech impediment. I would like to talk about rental inspections tonight. My rent recently went up $80. My landlord has never raised the rent on me in the 10 years I've lived here. As he puts it, rental inspections are very expensive and out of his control. I've learned through the maintenance man that if he does not comply to this, he will get his license revoked and everyone would have to move. Unfortunately, shady landlords make the good ones suffer, but ultimately, it's the tenants that stuck with the high price. I'm not very happy with this and contest the decision made here in Bellingham. I'm pitching pennies as it is, and I think $80 is a lot of money to anyone. It's just my guess, but I think from Whatcom County to the United States Supreme Court that there wouldn't be a judge in this land that would consent to such blatant communism. This is home invasion, an infringement on people's rights. Only communist government would make such a decision. An inspector is an active and well member of the new American Communist Party. This is an assault on people's freedom. I personally don't want to pay for this communism. And it is my hopes that dissatisfied people will stand up to this communism and give speeches about it and write the courts. Thank you, and God bless America while she's still here.
Thank you. That finishes our public comment period. We'll now move on to our committee reports. But actually, before I do, I just do want to respond to one comment. City council members are not law enforcement officers, both last week and this week. There are law enforcement officers in the room, and if there is a disturbance of any sort, it will be those peace officers which would address the issue, not your city council members. The first committee this afternoon to give a unique report now this evening is Public Works and Public Safety, and that committee is chaired by Councilmember Terry Borneman.
Thank you, Michael. We had one item before us today. It was Public Works capital project night work at F Street and West Holly Street. City contractors working on a water main replacement project at the intersection of West Holly Street and F Street will be performing construction activities during nighttime hours between March 1st and March 21st, 2017. This is a commercially zoned area. Therefore, nighttime work is permissible, and a City Council variance is not required under Bellingham Municipal Code 10.24.120. However, due to the proximity to the Lighthouse mission, staff brought this forward to City Council as an information item. The expected duration is 5 non-consecutive weeknights between the hours of 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. The use of nighttime of night work will provide additional traffic safety at this intersection. Therefore, Public Works staff supports the use of night work on this project. It was stated this was for information only. During the committee meeting, we'd also ask about the construction that was going on farther up on Holly Street, around Railroad and other areas, just to get an idea of the duration of that. And we're informed that Public Works was trying to get all this work done as early in the season as possible so that it would be done by summertime so it wouldn't disrupt activities in the downtown when the weather gets nicer. And so, end of report.
Thank you, Terry, very much. The next committee to meet this afternoon was Lake Whatcom Reservoir and Natural Resources Committee, and that is chaired by Councilmember Dan Hamill.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have 2 items before us this afternoon. The first one was an ordinance regarding the city's aquatic invasive species program, amending section 12.12.280 of the Bellingham Municipal Code. This afternoon, the committee voted unanimously to delay adoption of the ordinance until more information on costs for inspections on private property could be provided by staff, and I so move.
We have a motion and a second. This is an ordinance regarding the city's aquatic invasive species program. Any further discussion of this? All those in April.
Well, I'll just say what I said earlier. I think that we could allow this to go forward. We've already had a promise from staff. The language that's in here that we recognized at this point has gone through us several times, and I just think delaying this, putting staff kind of up against the wall, from what I understand, on timeline, whenever they need to get this to the county, and then make sure that we have the program going through. So I would hope that we would vote down the current motion and then approve this. We have a promise from staff that they're going to bring forward the information, and we'll move from there. I don't think we should hold up staff because we noticed something in the 11th hour, and it's not going to necessarily change exactly what this is, except for us potentially having a different revenue source for the concern.
Any further discussion? I'd like to say that I actually agree with much of what Councilmember Barker is saying. However, I don't think a 2-week delay is a problem. And one of the other things to point out is we always get things in the 11th hour. The City Council is always the final step. It's our job to do a little check. In this case, I think a 2-week pause isn't going to be problematic, but I think your concerns are still valid. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
That passes 6-1.
Second item before us this afternoon was an update in the aquatic invasive species program funding, and this had to do with some changes to the fee schedule. For 2017, the AIS fee schedule changes included a $10 increase to the annual permit fee and the inclusion of a small vessel fee and a 1-day pass. And then Councilmember Borneman also requested an amendment to be added into the fee schedule, and that would be additional costs would be included to cover additional staff time and travel costs for inspections on private property, and that amendment was given to staff this afternoon. And that's the end of committee report.
Okay. No further discussion on that item then. We'll move on to the Committee on Community and Economic Development. That is chaired by Councilmember Pinky Vargas.
We had 2 presentations today and 1 topic of discussion. Our first presentation was a report out on the recent activities of the Port of Bellingham as Whatcom County's Associate Development Organization, often referred to as the ADO. Just a little definition of that. It's designated by each county as the lead agency for economic development. Here in Whatcom County, that is done through the port. our primary local contact for Department of Commerce, Economic Development, Information and Leads, and supports business development through retention, expansion, and recruitment activities. So the port gave us a really great report out on all the things they did last year and the things that they are up and coming in 2017. Just a couple little highlights that are pretty exciting is iTech Energy will be moving down to Cornwall Street. They have bought one of the port buildings, and they'll be expanding to that's 30 more new jobs, so that's pretty exciting. And All American Marine is also on their way to finishing their new building with possibly 27 new jobs there. So they are going to be opening in spring of 2017, I believe, was, okay, if I wrote that down right. I might be wrong, but I think she said spring 2017. And they are working on a hybrid ferry project right now. So just some exciting things going on. And also just a reminder, if anybody has any leads out in the community or businesses or anybody's interested in moving their business to Bellingham, we are very excited about that prospect. And to please send them over to the port, to Dodd Snodgrass or John Mutcher. And also, just a reminder that we do have a wonderful partnership between the city, the port, and the county, and it's our Choose Whatcom, and the website is www.choosewhatcom.com. That gives an overview if anybody's interested in what's happening in Whatcom County or any business opportunities. And that was the first item. The second one is we had a presentation by Tara Sundin, our Community and Economic Development Manager, and she gave us an update on the interim low barrier homeless shelter and day center, which is a new program that is offered by the Lighthouse Mission Ministries. So currently right now, we want to say a special gratitude to the Lighthouse Mission and to the Fountain Community Church, because as we were trying to get a new low barrier shelter last year, we were kind of running out of options and didn't have places to be able to help people immediately. And we have lots of plans in regards to long-term transitional housings, but immediate solutions for people who are struggling, who are unsheltered here in Whatcom County. We needed to find places for them as soon as possible. And they actually stepped up, and they are providing low barrier shelter, which the definition of that is meaning that you don't have to have certain time requirements. You don't have to be necessarily sober, as long as you are able to come in and be in a public space and be appropriate in behavior. Everyone is open and allowed. So this is a 24-hour drop-in center now. This is something we have not had before, so it's a huge step forward for the city of Bellingham. And then they ran out of room, and the Fountain Community Church and the Red Cross stepped up to help people who are unsheltered as well. So these are actions that we could take for immediate results to help people who are unsheltered in the city of Bellingham. So we are very grateful to the Lighthouse Mission and Fountain Community Church for taking that action. And then the last thing is we had a little discussion about bringing a conversation to community about community and economic development, so discovering that. And that was all information only. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Pinky, for that report. We now come to the Committee of the Whole, which I will report. We had 4 items. They, too, were all for information only. The first was a presentation on Bellingham Neighbors Together. Bellingham Neighbors Together is a new program described this afternoon as an old-fashioned neighbor-to-neighbor approach. However, the program can be housed out of the Bellingham Police Department. It's aimed at both community connections and public safety. Volunteers are asked from any part of the community to come forward. There'll be a 6-week training program before anyone heads out into their neighborhood in pairs. These people will be observers and community builders, and they will have no enforcement capabilities. They will not get involved in conflicts. That's not their role. The next item was a presentation of a surplus lands analysis, which included establishing a replicable methodology and a report and action plan. The City of Bellingham staff have developed a replicable process for identifying potential surplus properties. These are properties owned by the city, but that we don't necessarily need. We have them for various reasons. Some is historical or accidental or on purpose. And looking at those properties to see which of those we could get rid of. The process relies on a 2-tier evaluation format. The first tier evaluates each city-owned property against a set of established and objective criteria. The second tier evaluation relies on project team to review the process, to evaluate and supplement the first tier evaluations, and the results are then stored in a centralized, accessible city property database for review each year. In the report, they identified 11% of all city-owned properties are potentially surplus. They identified those both in terms of short-term and long-term. In the short-term category, they identified 12 small properties that add up to 6.6 acres total, the assessed value of which is $2.5 million. Those are now being reviewed, and they might potentially be then surplused and sold in the public market. There are then longer-term properties which would be reviewed annually for potential moving to the short-term list. The third item discussed in the Committee of the Whole was an update on city center implementation. Difficult to summarize, but a couple years ago, in I think 2014, the city adopted a city center implementation strategy, which had to do with various city initiatives that spanned both downtown and Old Town and waterfront districts. Please look at that presentation. The overall picture is that many of the items have been completed or are near being completed, and a few more of them are still in the works. That was for information only. And the final information only was a review of the Planning Community Development's Long-Range Planning Division Work Program. There's a memo in the packet that indicated many areas, major projects, as well as other areas that the Long-Range Planning Division is working on. Those include an annexation phasing plan, that is when the city annexes, which comes first and why. They're working on an update of our accessory dwelling units ordinances, a reform of our subdivision ordinance, and as well as looking at our commercial zoning regulations to try to make those improve and work better for people who want to develop in commercial areas. The waterfront plan may need to be amended to reflect changes in how the waterfront is actually being developed now that it's undergoing the first signs of redevelopment. Several strong areas, smaller areas were also discussed, including looking at vacation rentals like VRBOs and Airbnb, and a few other areas like downtown design guidelines. Those are all in the work plan for planning community development in the coming year. The next is approval of city council meeting minutes, and I believe we have at least one set of minutes.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. I don't have them in front of me. Can we figure out what date those are before we vote?
Sure, those are January 23rd.
January 23rd. Everybody have a chance to review those? Any questions? All those in favor of approving the January 23rd meeting minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Those passed unanimously. Old and new business. Pinky.
I wanted to give a shout out about this Family Council Day today and how absolutely wonderful it was. And I really want to thank Councilmember Dan Hamill for making this happen, and it was truly wonderful. And also to Jennifer Mason, who did a lot to get all these children here and who made us these great trading cards. Okay, they weren't for us, they were for the kids, but I got a copy. But I
got a whole deck.
Yeah.
I'm going to use them.
I just want to say how absolutely wonderful it was to hear children's laughter in the council chambers, and I hope that this is the first of many of these experiences. So thank you, Jen, and thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Pinky. Anybody else? Dan.
You're welcome, but I do want to credit Jen Mason, who did all of the work on this. What I did, my contributions to this could fill a thimble, but I do thank you for saying it. I did bring this forward. I felt it was important for families to feel welcome in these chambers and to understand, or at least have this process be normalized for kids to come in and feel comfortable here, and families as well. But Jen Mason was the driving force behind this, and I think citizens that are active like that, hats off to them. So thanks.
Gene?
And this is no joke, but it can leave a lasting image. I first sat out there when I was 7 years old in 1962. And you could not see the council members because of the smoke. They were all smoking. Everybody in the audience was smoking. This had to be painted because it was yellower than you know what. And it was, yeah, but anyway, a lasting legacy that you remember that growing up, and it turned out good for me. So for the kids, it could turn out for them too. So that's a good question. My father brought me. I have no idea why we were here.
Were you being punished?
April?
I'm going to tread a little lightly here. Peter, you might have to help me because it involves organization's name. But so recently, an organization laid off 100 employees due to transferring their lab work to a different group. Those were all union jobs, which we declared in our last resolution that we found important and valuable in this community. And I haven't been on council just a year and a couple months. What have we done in the past when we've had a large-scale layoff like this? I mean, this is significant in our community. I know that our hands are a bit tied, that it's a private business, but have we done anything in the past to reach out to the families, or what has been done and what can we do?
Are you looking at me?
If you want to volunteer.
I have not an idea if Peace Health is helping the employees at all make some kind of a transition, because we have excellent resources in our community, whether it's WorkSource or other organizations that are set up to help people find a new job if they aren't being offered one through something else. I guess what I'd say is I don't think the city has something organized, but surely neighborhood by neighborhood, so I'll make my pitch to MNAC and our neighborhood organizations to reach out to your fellow neighbors if you know that they have been somebody that's affected by this with Peace Health. And if there is anything that we've done in the past or that the council would like us to explore, we'd be happy to do that to see if it's appropriate. Obviously, we hate it when we get good union jobs lost in our community.
Roxanne?
Yeah, one of the things I sadly learned is that from one employee's perspective, or soon to be laid off employee's perspective, was that they can get a severance package. They can also apply for a similar job with another organization, but if they do so and they do or don't get the job, their severance will be denied. So this is a sticky situation, but the thing that I wanted to say is that SEIU is putting petitions around in our community that you can sign to ask Peace Health to treat people more equitably, give more notice, and provide better circumstances. So that's what I have signed and the way I will be involved.
April, I guess I would say that for several years the city's been looking at what our role is in economic development. And the consensus has often been, as much as we may regret individual decisions, and for example, the Albertsons closing was regrettable for many other reasons as well, our role is a little further back. It's to set the table for economic development. Pinky was just referring to the fact that ITEC is a local success story. They're around the Iron Gate district. They've outgrown their facility. They've moved to a larger facility in the waterfront. I don't know if the Bellingham deserves credit for that, but the Port Authority deserves some credit for accommodating them. I think that's the sort of thing that governments can do, is to help set the table. I don't know if we can or should respond to individual businesses' decisions to open or close. I think our hope always is that by setting the table properly, more will open than close. The natural churn will be a healthy churn. I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, but I think that's kind of where we are. Terry?
In terms of historically, the council, individual council members have made statements about different things, but the council as a whole has, it hasn't been our place to do that, and we haven't taken any specific action. And I think for Gene and I, the biggest was, of course, the closing of Georgia Pacific.
Yeah.
I mean, a layoff and shutting down that had major economic effects on the city. But as a city council, our business is to try to set regulatory policy that helps establish and work with businesses and do other things. But the businesses themselves, we kind of stay out of their way, because that's not actually our business. But individual council members have always been free, and a number of us have been very active in terms of speaking out against certain actions. But as a council as a whole, we found it's kind of not our role to interfere with those business practices. It's not our business.
Michael? Oh, change.
Yeah, Terry's right. Individually, I've walked about 10 picket lines since I've been on the council. I mean, a lot of people didn't like it, but I did it anyway, and I think that's something that each individual council member can do.
Yeah.
It's like you brought up the tragedy in your area with the closure of Albertsons. It's horrible and sad, but yeah, it's but where the mayor's coming from in any way that the other agencies that are out there that can help people that we know, and we can lend our support verbally or written or whatever. So.
Well, when I was, when Georgia Pacific closed, I was in the legislature, and the legislature did have a role in worker retraining and extended unemployment benefits, and Governor Gregoire and I came up here and met with the union workers at Georgia Pacific and explained to them what was available for them through the state, because we represented the state, you know, what the state could offer. So I think it doesn't hurt to talk to the other agencies that we're in contact with. And obviously, these are workers that have union representation. So the good news about that is the unions are quite aware of at least where the benefits are when you lose your employment that way. And the state, Washington State, at least at one time when we were losing a lot of workers across timber areas and mills and fishing and all of those, were very sensitive and put good benefits as a state in place and extended unemployment benefits and things like that in place for workers that have lost their jobs. So there are resources available, just not necessarily from us, though obviously we have well-trained people. We always are looking for good employees. They could apply to look at what's open in the city of Bellingham and apply for a job. So we certainly could do that.
Anything else under old and new? I guess I'll just mention that the City Council is having our annual retreat coming up March 25th. That will be on City Park property, Woodstock Farm. The public is invited to witness it if they'd like to, but it won't actually be a public meeting of the usual sort. There'll be official notice going out about that. Well, next go on to report of our executive session. There were 5 items originally scheduled. A 6th was added. The first is potential litigation matter. Staff provided information on that matter. It was for information and discussion only. No action was taken. The second item was potential property acquisition. Staff provided information on potential property acquisition. They're looking for a motion to authorize the purchase of 0.14 acres of watershed parcel from Donald, Sally, and Olga Dashuk for $60,000 with an anticipated closing date of March 15th, 2017.
So move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Okay. We have a motion and a second to authorize the purchase of this property. If I recall correctly, this is in the watershed and is being paid for out of our watershed preservation dollars as part of our stormwater control. Is an area which is undeveloped and surrounded by undeveloped land the city already owns. All those in favor of authorizing this purchase signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. The third item was another potential property acquisition. For this one, the staff provided information, and it was for discussion only. No action was taken. Fourth matter was also potential property acquisition, and staff again provided information on the potential acquisition for information and discussion only. No action was taken on that matter. The fifth matter was potential litigation. Staff provided information on a potential litigation matter. Again, that was for information and discussion only. No action was taken. The final matter was both a combination of potential litigation and property acquisition together. Staff provided information on that litigation matter and that potential property acquisition matter. It also was for information and discussion only. No action was taken on that. Mayor's report.
I'll just commend the council, specifically Representative Councilmember Hamel for the family celebration. It's wonderful to see those articulate young children, 3 years old, please, up there being advocates for their position. So that was great. I have one request, and that is, you mentioned your retreat, And Rick Sepler has a very informative sustainable services model that he would like, hopefully, to be able to present to you at your retreat, which talks about developing a new budgeting kind of system and how we involve the council. So I was hoping that maybe you'd have time at your retreat to let him make that presentation.
We have already allotted about a third of the time to that sort of topic, and we were looking to reach out to staff, Rick in particular, and I think Ted also. So I think that definitely could be accommodated into our current schedule.
Well, there's a team of staff directors that are working on this, so that would be great. I have two appointments. One is advisory only, and that is Jeff Albright to the Bellingham Sister Cities Advisory Board. And we did do 8 interviews for the Planning Commission with an eye to diversifying the people that we have represented on the commission. And we had 1 appointment for now and 1 appointment for March 1st. So the appointment for now is Mike Estes to the Planning Commission.
I'd like to move approval for this and many things. I'll second it.
He's still here, too.
Well, he wanted to get a standing ovation, I think, so go ahead.
I'm sorry, so was it a motion? I don't know who's
Second.
And the second over there. Thank you. We have a motion and a second to appoint Mr. Esses to the Planning Commission. Any further discussion? Anyone want to roast Mike? Yeah. Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Congratulations, Mr. Esses.
And then I will be bringing another appointment forward. We've already selected the second member of the Planning Commission, and that name will come forward to you when the opening occurs, which should be March 1st, I think, or April 1st. Okay, they're over there talking. As soon as the vacancy occurs, I'll bring someone forward to you. We had what we believed were 8 very, very qualified members, and it was very difficult to select them. There were quite a few applicants, and we didn't give everybody an interview, obviously, because we could have been there for 3 days. But we were looking at what you had asked us to look at, so mix of the commission, and also potentially, just some kind of well-rounded, broad perspective individuals. So you might get some questions about why there weren't some people weren't interviewed, and I'd hope you would refer those to me, Rick and I, so we could follow up.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? No. We'll move on to consent agenda.
Approval.
Second.
Did you catch that, Elizabeth? Okay. See, officially, it's my job as chair to recognize, but I can't tell. And you're more fair than I am. Okay, we have a motion to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. Final considerations of ordinances, of which we have 5 to pass tonight.
Agenda Bill 21494, an ordinance of the City of Bellingham, Washington, dissolving the Public Works Advisory Board, repealing Bellingham Municipal Code, Chapter 2.28.
Move third and final.
Second.
We have a motion to approve third and final dissolution of Public Works Advisory Board. Roll call.
Terry Borneman,
Aye.
Dan Hamel,
Aye.
Jean Knutson, Michael Lillequist,
Aye.
Roxanne Murphy,
Aye.
Pinky Vargas,
Aye.
April Barker.
Aye.
Ordinance passes 7-0. Agenda Bill 21495, an ordinance of the City of Bellingham, Washington, consenting to the transfer of Starcom Service Corporation's telecommunications franchise within the city to its successor in interest, Zayo Group, LLC.
Move third and final.
Second.
Motion before us to approve third reading of the ordinance consenting transfer of the franchise agreement. Roll call.
Dan Hamel,
Aye.
Jean Knutson, Michael Lillequist,
Aye.
Roxanne Murphy,
Aye.
Pinky Vargas,
Aye.
April Barker,
Aye.
Terry Borneman.
Aye.
Ordinance passes 7-0. Agenda Bill 21497, an ordinance of the City of Bellingham, Washington regarding telecommunications facilities located within the city right-of-way, amending Chapter 13.15 of the Bellingham Municipal Code.
Move third and final.
Second.
A motion before us to approve the third reading of an ordinance regarding telecommunication facilities located in the city rights of way. Roll call.
Gene Knutson. Michael Lillquist.
Aye.
Roxanne Murphy.
Aye.
Pinky Vargas.
Aye.
April Barker.
Aye.
Terry Borneman.
Aye.
Dan Hamel.
Aye.
Ordinance passes 7-0. Agenda Bill 21480, an ordinance of the City of Bellingham, Washington regarding special events, repealing Chapter 10.32, adopting a new Chapter 13.13, and amending Section 20.10.040 of the Bellingham Municipal Code.
Move third and final.
Second.
We have a motion before us to approve the third reading of an ordinance adopting a process for city review and approval of special events. Roll call.
Michael Lillquist.
Aye.
Roxanne Murphy.
Aye.
Pinky Vargas.
Aye.
April Barker.
Aye.
Terry Borneman.
Aye.
Dan Hamel.
Aye.
Gene Knutson. Ordinance passes 7-0. Agenda Bill 21506, an ordinance of the City of Bellingham, Washington relating to city policy with respect to immigration enforcement, equal protection, and equal provision of city services regardless of immigration status, and creating a new chapter of the Bellingham Municipal Code regarding such matters.
Move third and final.
Second.
We have a motion to approve the third and final reading of an ordinance relating to city policy with respect to immigration enforcement, equal protection, and equal provision of city services. Roll call, please.
April Barker.
Aye.
Terry Borneman.
Aye.
Dan Hamel.
Aye.
Gene Knutson. Michael Lillquist.
Aye.
Roxanne Murphy.
Aye.
Pinky Vargas.
Aye.
Ordinance passes 7-0.
Thank you. Is there any more business for the Bellingham City Council? Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.